if you need or would like access to captioning today. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Michael.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. It's entitled Writing at the Graduate Level. So this webinar is really meant to be kind of an introduction to some of the differences between undergraduate and graduate writing. But before I really kind of get into this, I just want to kind of reassure you a little bit that the writing that you've done in your undergraduate work is not, completely night and day different than the writing you're going to be expected to do at a graduate level. I mean, there are some very significant differences, right? But it's not like we need to start from zero here. So don't be too intimidated by this transition from undergraduate to graduate writing in that it is still academic writing. It is still writing dealing with the ideas of others. So you're gonna find some similarities to the work you're already doing here. As you can see, my name is Michael Dusek. I'm a writing instructor here at Walden University. There's my awesome first day of school picture there. Yeah, learning outcomes for this session. Really, we're going to be discussing the difference between graduate and undergraduate writing. And I'm going to touch on a number of kind of elements or foundational elements, as the slide says, of how undergraduate writing differs from graduate writing. These foundational elements include things like developing an argument and using analysis in your writing, the use of paraphrase, and instead of maybe relying heavily on quotation, we're going to talk about maybe why paraphrase is more useful and is expected at a graduate level. We're going to talk a bit about scholarly voice. And lastly, I'm going to touch a little bit on APA style. But again, in the kind of scope of this webinar, I'm not really going to be going into a ton of depth with these foundational elements. We have other resources, we have other webinars that really dive into these ideas. Again, this session is really meant to be kind of an introduction to you, so I'm going to touch on these foundational elements, but I'm really not going to be going into a great deal of depth. So if that's something you're interested in, go ahead and check out our other resources, and we're going to offer some other resources to you throughout the session, as Claire mentioned, that will be kind of a helpful follow-up for you. Okay, graduate writing, to kind of get a base definition for everyone. Here's how Walden defines graduate writing. Scholarly writing is also known as academic writing. It is the genre of writing used in all academic fields. Scholarly writing is not better than journalism, fiction, or poetry. It is just a different category. Because most of us are not used to scholarly writing, it can feel unfamiliar and intimidating, but it is a skill that can be learned by immersing yourself in scholarly literature. During your studies at Walden, you will be reading, discussing, and producing scholarly writing in everything from discussion posts to dissertations. Yeah, so a couple important bits that I'd like to pick out here to talk about. One, this is something that you're going to be doing throughout your program, from the discussion posts all the way up to larger capstone projects like a dissertation that you're going to be working on. So some of the elements of scholarly writing that we're going to be discussing here today can be applied to every writing project that you're going to be doing, whether it be something a bit more informal like a discussion post or something really formal like a dissertation. So that's just one thing I wanted to mention here. The other thing is a couple other things. One, this is a skill that can be learned, right? Nobody's born or like brought up as an incredible academic writer. It's no one's initial language or first language, right? So this is something that all people need to kind of learn if this is something that you're into, and it can be learned, right? The last thing is this notion that immersing yourself in scholarly literature can help you with this learning, with this knowledge, or gaining this knowledge, better said. And what I think is important about this portion is that it kind of shows the relationship between reading of scholarly works and improving your own scholarly writing. There's a vein of composition research that talks about how important it is to be exposed to scholarly writing as a means to develop as a scholarly writer. And so I just wanted to kind of bring that up too, that when you're reading the work of others, you are in a way kind of ingesting some of the elements of their writing and you can take those elements and then kind of display them in your own writing. So yeah, that's a kind of a working definition there of scholarly writing. But there's a few important elements there that I think can be kind of pulled aside and highlighted. Said another way, to put simply, to kind of bring it back to a simple definition, it's another type of writing and thinking, right? Scholarly writing is how we participate in the conversations within our field as scholars. Some of the differences then. One, when you're in undergraduate writing, a lot of times you're summarizing. You're taking a piece that you've looked at and you're kind of saying what you took from it, right? In graduate writing, summary is really not enough. You need to work with those ideas, offering analysis, working with the ideas of other authors, putting them in conversation with one another, and really drawing your own conclusions. So again, rather than summarizing, you're going to be really working with the ideas of others to support and kind of to support your own ideas. I was searching for a word there that I couldn't find. Undergraduate writing, again, you're generally using one source. You're commenting on or again, summarizing one source. In graduate writing, you're going to be working with multiple sources and bringing them together in conversation with one another, an idea that we kind of colloquially refer to as synthesis in composition communities. In undergraduate writing, you're really trying to demonstrate that you understand content, right? You're demonstrating, hey, I understood this piece and here's what I understood about it. Graduate writing, you're going to be adding to the content. You're joining the conversation around a topic, idea, or a topic or idea, better said, and you're kind of adding your own voice. You're joining this conversation. In undergraduate writing, you're often going to be dealing with course readings. In graduate writing, oftentimes this is going to be on you to supply the research that develops the point that you're making. Okay, so again, it's kind of that step away from you being provided what you need to form an idea into you need to go find what you need to kind of inform and support the ideas that you're working with. In undergraduate writing, you're often going to be working with textbooks, websites, kind of course handouts that are used as your supporting documents. In graduate writing, again, from your own research, you're going to be looking at studies and more statistical data. Journal articles being the primary source of where you're finding these studies or the ideas from the studies are expanded upon and statistical data is offered. So again, you're not working with kind of a summary of a study. You are going to find the actual study, the writing of the person who specifically looked at an idea, and you're going to be drawing from that rather than from someone else's summary of that particular study. In looking at something like an assignment prompt, we can see the differences here that I kind of highlighted between undergraduate and graduate writing. As we look at the undergraduate prompt here, this week you will examine the characteristics of successful distance learning. So examine, it's asking you to take a look at it, but not really to apply that knowledge, right? Students will explain the effectiveness of instructional interactions in distance learning environments, describe the metaphors for learning, as these apply to distance learning environments, identify the attributes of successful distance learning. Yeah, so explain, describe, identify. These are, this prompt is asking you for summary. It's asking you to say what you saw in there, to describe it, to identify it, to explain it, right? As opposed to a graduate assignment prompt, which really is asking for more application of those ideas. This week you will analyze education policy. So it's not enough to just look at it. You need to kind of critically analyze it and bring your own critical eye to that. In those objectives, analyze education policies. Analyze the influence of education policies on roles of educational psychologists. You're going to analyze ways to improve education policy effectiveness. Develop an annotated bibliography. Synthesize educational psychology research for literature reviews. Again, these kind of action words here are really pointing you towards a application of this knowledge. You're analyzing, you're bringing your criticism, your own critical eye to this work. You're compiling, you're developing things, so you're collecting, right? That's going to be kind of akin to that research bullet point on our previous slide. And again, synthesizing or bringing these sources together. You're not talking about them in isolation. You're talking about sources as they exist as part of a larger conversation, right? Here's an example of what a final project prompt could look like at a graduate level. For a final project, select a topic of interest to you related to educational psychology. So, you have that creative freedom, right? It's not so much like, tell me what you think about this one thing. It's hey, find something that interests you. And the notion of following your own interest and your own curiosity is really important and comes into play to a large extent when you're thinking about starting a research project. Um, Research and critique 20 to 25 scholarly articles related to a selective topic. So again, this is more than one, right? More than one article. You're bringing a number of different articles, a number of different viewpoints of scholars into conversation with one another. Select 10 to 12 articles that are most relevant to your topic. So you're vetting sources. You're looking for the ones that are most relevant to your research project. Create an annotated bibliography. Sure, limit each annotation. So we kind of go on here. And towards the end, the important part that I think is important is this kind of the meat of the assignment prompt, right? Comprise a 7 to 10 page literature review, synthesize arguments and ideas of the scholars who contribute to that topic. Write a 3 to 4 page annotated bibliography. So again, we're taking the views of other scholars and we're bringing them together, putting them in conversation with one another. We're synthesizing their arguments and commenting on how these arguments agree with one another, how they disagree, how one may be building off of another, how one may be kind of contradictory to another or take a different angle at this topic idea. Yeah, again, the notion that I'm trying to get at here with these assignment prompts is that oftentimes in undergraduate writing, you're summarizing and you're looking to kind of observe and comment on a piece. In graduate writing, it's really asking you to take this piece, contextualize it in the larger conversation that's going on around this topic idea, and apply this knowledge that you've researched, that you've gained, to make a point of your own. It's more about application than it is about demonstrating your kind of understanding, is really the bullet point that I would like to drive home here. Yeah, you're choosing a topic, you're doing your own research, as I mentioned, and you're synthesizing sources. These are, some of the, again, foundational elements of graduate writing. Okay, so let's participate in a little chat here. What I'm looking for you to put in the chat box is, what do you anticipate to be the biggest challenge in graduate level writing? I know from the chat box in the beginning of the presentation that some of you have some experience with graduate level writing. So what have you experienced as the biggest challenge, if that applies to you? But yeah, let's just take a minute or two here and kind of anticipate or imagine some of the challenges in graduate writing and how that might be different from undergraduate writing. I'm going to go on mute for a minute. All right, I'm seeing some awesome responses come into the chat box. A little bit of venting here, perhaps. If you want to participate in this chat, I'm just going to give you another minute to do so. I see that multiple attendees are typing at the moment, so I want to give you a chance to finish there. But then I'm going to comment a little bit on some of the trends I'm seeing here. Yeah, so take another minute if you want to participate in this chat. Okay. Thank you guys for participating in that. I saw a lot of great responses there. Again, a lot of venting, which I think is helpful. Just generally. Couple trends that I'm seeing here. First, I saw a lot of students mentioning selecting a topic. I think one student even said feeling paralyzed by the notion of selecting a topic. Yeah, this is something I think that I can absolutely kind of sympathize with, having been in that position myself. Um, and so I guess with that, I would just encourage you to really follow your own curiosity, and allow yourself to be taken uh, down some of these topic veins where you can find something that is narrowed enough and is specific enough. Well, I guess that would be the same thing to really fit the requirements of the assignment that you're doing. So follow your own curiosity there. I think that on a more positive note is one of the real benefits of being a scholar and joining the scholarly community is that it is really up to you what you write on. And I think that can be a little bit freeing, in addition to being daunting and paralyzing. So I guess what I'm saying is try to find the balance there. Another main theme that I saw here was the notion of research, and there's so much research out there. How can I read all the research that's available in a topic area? Um, One thing I would say in response to that is, having a really narrowed topic, and a narrow topic being appropriate for the scope of your project, I think is really helpful there. And knowing that you don't need to read every single thing that's ever been written on a broad topic area, that really you need to focus in on a specific conversation that's going on within that topic area. That would be one kind of thing that I would have to say in response to that. The other thing I would say to that kind of research anxiety theme that I'm seeing here in the chat box is that you should definitely use your librarians at whatever university you go to. I know there are students in here that are from outside of Walden University. The research librarians are professional researchers, right? They get paid to find really good sources for you and to help students as they dive into some of these larger research projects. So definitely take advantage of them. That was one thing in my master's program that I wish I would have done more of, because it would have just made things easier on me. So yeah, I would kind of put a plug in there for librarians everywhere. Lastly, the kind of third theme that I'm seeing is kind of about the mechanics of writing, using APA, scholarly tone, using grammar correctly, kind of to dovetail off this notions that I haven't been in school for a while, so this is kind of something I feel rusty at, or that I haven't had as much practice with in the last however many years as I would like. And to that, I would again say that this is something that takes practice, and that you can really improve with more practice, with more reading of scholarly articles, with more application of writing elements such as sentence construction, such as APA citation. These are things that you are going to develop a comfortability with over time. So if you're not there yet, that's totally fine. But just know that you are going to become more comfortable using this, and with practice, you will get better at it. So I'm not trying to minimize any of your anxieties. They are legitimate, and I've felt all of those anxieties in my own work. But the show does go on, I guess is what I'm saying, and you will get better at these things. So little encouragement there towards the end. Okay, I'm gonna move on. If you want to change the slide layout there. So transitioning then from graduate level writing, or from undergraduate writing into graduate level writing, we can take a look at some of these foundational elements of graduate level writing that make them different, right? Things like developing an argument and including this analytical piece, right? Paraphrasing and how that becomes a really favored method of source usage over something like quotation. Something like scholarly voice. That's kind of a little bit of an aloof topic, but there are some concrete aspects of scholarly voice that we can really lay hand on, or point to, that you can specifically focus on as you work to become a better writer. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those also. And lastly, what seems like everyone's favorite topic, APA style, and using that notation of the social sciences, bringing that kind of uniformity to your piece, so that you are essentially speaking in the language of your scholarly communities. So we're going to take a look at these foundational elements and kind of pick them apart individually as we go on here. Argument and analysis. Don't just report what you learned. Take part in the conversation. Join that conversation. Yeah, at the level that you're at, it's not enough to just say, this is what I found in my research. You are going to be, as you go on in your program, more and more encouraged to join those conversations, to add your own voice and add your own opinion. Now, I know when I was a graduate student and I heard that, that sounded really daunting, because I would say to myself things like, well, who am I to try to join this conversation with these scholars who have been in the field for many years and who are really well read and really articulate in their writing. But the fact of it is that your viewpoint is valid. And you may have something that people who are writing in this topic area don't have. You may have a fresh perspective on some of these ideas. You bring your own context to your writing in that way. And so again, I always found that as kind of almost freeing, right? That being yourself and having your own voice can allow you to add to these conversations and add to the wealth of knowledge around a topic. So again, starting with kind of an anxiety and trying to turn it to something a little more positive. Own that ability to take part in these conversations and trust in your own view and trust in your own experiences and your own context to kind of help you as you develop your own scholarly voice and your own opinions, your own approaches to these topics. I hope that was clear. That was a little rambly, so I apologize. But essentially, you need to take part in the conversation, and I've always found that a little empowering that you kind of are invited to do that. Part of making an argument is crafting a thesis statement, right? This is something that is a kind of a draw over, a holdover from undergraduate writing. So if you've had some experience with this before, that's awesome. That's only going to serve to help you. If you haven't, that's fine. We're going to talk about it right here. And there is a number of great resources in the Walden Writing Center to help you as you kind of learn to craft more effective thesis statements. But a thesis statement, it's a brief articulation of what your piece is arguing. You're telling the reader the main argument of the piece. It needs to be specific. So, you don't want this to be too broad. You want it to speak directly to the point that you're making in your piece. And it needs to be arguable, right? Someone needs to be able to argue against you. So in that way, you need to avoid crafting a thesis statement that simply informs the reader. At the graduate level, you really need to be making an argument in your writing. Where is this located? Generally, this comes at the end of an introduction paragraph, at the end of an introduction section within academic writing. So that's kind of where the reader is going to expect to find this. So let's take a couple looks at some thesis statements here. Give me one sec. Yeah, so our first example is an example of a not so great thesis statement. This paper is about classroom management. As I take a look at this from a composition writing standpoint, the first thing I notice is that it's extremely broad, right? For those of you who have kind of delved into research at all, you'll know that typing classroom management into a research search bar is going to return thousands of different articles. So it's very, very broad. So you're going to need to first narrow that topic a bit to make it more manageable for you to even approach. Secondly, as I look at this thesis statement doesn't make an argument, right? This is an informative thesis statement. This paper is about classroom management. You can't really argue against that. I guess you could say, no, this paper isn't about that, but I mean, the paper is about that, right? So this is an example of an informative thesis that really isn't putting an argument forth for the reader. Here's an example of a little better one. Classroom management is an important part of teaching. So again, we have this kind of broad notion of classroom management. As a composition person, I would say that this is really needs to be narrowed still. But it is making kind of an argument here. It's saying that this is important. It's an important part of teaching. So someone on the other side could say, hey, no, classroom management is not an important part of teaching. This is kind of a weak argument though, right? Because there's been a lot of research published that says that classroom management has some effect and is an important element of classroom or of teaching in a classroom. So again, this is a little bit better, but we're not really all the way there yet. Of these three, here's the best one, and this is what a thesis statement could look like. All teachers should develop the classroom management skills of authority, individualization, and time management, which are necessary to run effective classrooms. Yeah, so first of all, this is specific enough. We're talking about specific ideas of authority, of individualization, and of time management. These are being elements of classroom management, but we're being more specific than we were in our previous two examples. We're not focusing on classroom management as this broad umbrella kind of idea. We're focusing in on these three aspects of classroom management. And the argument here being that these are necessary to run an effective classroom. Now, someone can come by and argue that there are three other elements that are necessary to run an effective classroom. And off the top of my head, I'm not going to try to kind of make up what those could be, but the notion here is that someone can disagree with you. This is an arguable thesis. Someone can say that there are other elements that are more important than authority, individualization, and time management that are more important to have in order to run an effective classroom. So again, the notion that I'm trying to get across to you here is that a thesis statement needs to be specific in that it's telling the reader specifically what you're looking at, and it needs to be arguable. So someone needs to be able to disagree with you. To move then to the analysis portion of this kind of bullet point, you need to use evidence in graduate level writing, right? Evidence supports your central argument throughout the paper. So if every piece of evidence that you use needs to in some way support that thesis statement. It needs to in some way be providing some sort of support for the argument that you're making. Doing this, including evidence, demonstrates your credibility. Absolutely. It shows that you are well researched on this topic, and that the argument that you're making makes the most logical sense based on the research that you've read. It shows that you're well read on the topic, essentially. So in that way, it builds your credibility as an author. It makes the reader more likely to believe what they're reading from you. Each sentence that uses information from a source must include a citation. Yeah, so this is something that, there are a few exceptions to this, but essentially you need to give credit to the sources that you're drawing from. When you're using someone's idea, you need to give them credit for that. In scholarly communities, in the world of academe, the ideas that you have are really like kind of it's like your thing, right? It's something that lends credibility to you. It's the kind of thing that gets you research grants and promotions. So you need to give credit to the people whose ideas you're drawing from. Here's an example of what evidence could look like in academic writing, in graduate level academic writing. According to Wilson, we have our citation there, 2011, 68% of Dallas high school juniors reported chronic boredom in math classes. Yeah, so again, using evidence is really important, and there are a number of other kind of webinars and resources through a Walden Library that talk about how to use evidence and the importance of evidence. But again, I'm just kind of touching on that here today. The notion being that graduate level writing uses evidence to support the points that are being made. Analysis then is your own interpretation of the author's ideas. You're kind of acting as a translator for the reader. Presenting source material as evidence is really good, but really as a graduate level writer, you need to connect that source material to the main idea of the paragraph, which then supports the main argument that you're making. And to do this, you use analysis. Okay, this tells the reader, how those pieces fit together. Put differently, it tells the reader why that information matters or why that information is important to consider in the conversation that you're creating in a piece that you're writing. Here's what analysis can look like. According to Wilson, 2011, 68% of Dallas high school juniors reported chronic boredom in math classes, suggesting a need to reconsider the math curriculum and invest in teacher training in this district. So we have a piece of source material here at the beginning of this sentence, right? It's that Wilson paraphrase that we saw in our previous slide. But just presenting that idea is not enough. You need to tell the reader what you mean for them to take from that piece of source material. What is the important part of that? What does that demonstrate that is important to building my own argument would be the question that analysis then answers. And in this case, this data suggests that, hey, we got to rethink this curriculum because of this chronic boredom issue. Oh, but yeah, you get what I'm saying here. Analysis shows the reader why that source material is important, and it connects the dots for the reader so that they don't have to kind of guess as to why you included that source material. One thing that we think of when we think of organizing an academic paragraph, this being a body paragraph, one format that we use in the Walden Writing Center is the meal plan. This is an effective format in that it includes the elements that are necessary for an effective academic paragraph. Now, my meal plan paragraph is probably going to look different than all of your meal plan paragraphs because, hey, we're individuals, right? We say things differently. We, bring ideas together in different ways. But what's really useful to me about the meal plan is that it has the elements that are necessary in an effective body paragraph. So these elements being, one, a main idea, and this is shown to the reader in a topic sentence. You can think of a topic sentence as kind of being like a thesis statement for a body paragraph. You're telling the reader what the paragraph is about right away so that they can see how that kind of idea is then elaborated upon and supported. How do you support it? By using evidence, which is another element that's really necessary and important to include in an academic paragraph. Evidence being source material, some sort of evidentiary support that shows why you're arguing this point. Analysis then kind of connects these two. It tells you again why that source material is important and how that fits into this main idea of the paragraph that you're crafting. And lastly, you kind of lead the reader out, offering some kind of concluding. Excuse me. Here's what this could look like in a kind of a really simple meal plan paragraph. Supervision is one practice in transactional leadership theory that aids with employee retention. So this paragraph is talking specifically about supervision. On a broader like notion of this piece that we're kind of using the example from here, the piece is about transactional leadership. So in this way, this specific paragraph kind of connects back to the thesis statement. This is just one practice in transactional leadership that's important, right? So we have our topic sentence there. Through supervision, managers can reward employees for good work, which Duffy 2011 suggested increases employee retention rates. So there we have a little bit of a paraphrase and a little bit of a quotation there. The analysis piece then, improved retention not only contributes to an efficient workplace, but it can promote workplace stability and is a useful strategy in any workplace. So yeah, this is kind of connecting the dots for the reader. It's translating that piece of source material. It's telling the reader why that piece of source material is important to consider. Then lastly, we have our kind of lead out here. Because of its ability to improve both workplace stability and its effect on employee retention, any manager that ascribes to the transactional leadership theory should use supervision. Again, this is kind of a simplistic example of how the meal plan can be carried out or kind of applied to a body paragraph, but it has the necessary elements in an effective body paragraph. And that's really what I think is useful about the meal plan. It tells you what you need to include in order to really to craft a complete academic paragraph. Paraphrasing. Yeah, paraphrasing put simply is taking the ideas of another person and putting them into your own words. Put here, including your own sentence structure, phrasing, and vocabulary. So it's not enough to just, substitute a word like big from your source passage with a word like large in your own writing. You need to actually change the structure of the sentence, change the phrasing, and change the vocabulary there. Some steps in effective paraphrasing, and this is something if you don't have a lot of experience with, you're going to get a lot of experience with, because paraphrasing is really it's the favored method of showing the reader source material. It's the favored method of displaying the ideas that you're drawing upon as evidentiary support. So some steps in crafting an effective paraphrase. One, read the passage, ensure that you fully understand that idea, fact or statistic. An important aspect of paraphrasing is that you're keeping the idea in its original context and you're accurately representing the idea of the author. You don't want to take a bit of of source material and kind of make it say what you need it to say, to kind of be casual about it. It needs to be fair and accurate to what was actually to the author's actual point. 2, go to a blank page, a blank screen. And then 3, imagine you were explaining this piece of source material, this passage that you just read, to a colleague. How would you put that? Then you can revise this and check it against the original. And lastly, you need to cite this. Again, I think it's pretty easy to know that, hey, when I'm drawing and taking the words from an author, that I need to give them credit for those words. But at a graduate level, you also need to give credit to the author for their ideas. So even though you put it in your own words, using your own sentence structure, your own phrasing, etc., you need to give the author whose idea that is credit for that idea. So again, this is just kind of a few effective steps that we think about to craft a paraphrase that really works. And it's a way to kind of double check that too. Some examples of paraphrase. Let's go ahead and go to our second chat here. We have our original paraphrase passage here. Oh, yeah, we have our original paraphrase passage here, and then we have we have our original passage from our Smith 2013 source there. Below, we have a paraphrase of that passage. What I'd like you to do is compare this original quote or this original passage to the sample paraphrase and talk about what are the paraphrase's strengths, what are some of the weaknesses of that paraphrase. Again, compare the paraphrase example to the original passage and tell me what it's doing well and what it could do better. Okay, I'm going to go on mute for a minute. All right, thank you guys for putting some answers, some responses in the chat box here. In the interest of time, I'm going to kind of move along here. Some of you thought that one of the strengths of this was that it used a citation. That's a really critical aspect, right? You need to give credit to these ideas, to the author who produced these ideas, right? Some of you thought that the tone could have been more accurately reflected from the paraphrase from the original. I guess I would agree with that. I mean, I would also say that this is a pretty effective paraphrase in general. That it does kind of get the point across that the original source passage is making. But as you guys did point out, the tone was a little bit more heavy-handed, I think, than the original. Use of the word may versus use of the word must. There is a little bit of a change. But in general, I think that this student was doing a pretty good job. Okay, I'm going to move forward then. Claire, do we have any questions from the chat box that would bear answering at this point?
No questions, but go ahead and send them to me if you do have any, and I'll pass them on to Michael at the end of the presentation.
Awesome. So then let's transition and talk a bit about scholarly voice, this kind of more amorphous idea that applies to scholarly writing, because I say that because it's a little bit more difficult to define. But there are some really concrete aspects, some concrete aspects here that contribute to scholarly voice. Formality, using formal language is one aspect that contributes to a scholarly voice or a scholarly tone. You don't want to be too casual. This isn't, kind of like explaining this to a friend. You're really entering an academic community where formal language is favored. You need to be neutral, and this is something that some of you talked about in our kind of evaluation of that paraphrase. You need to maintain an unbiased tone. If the reader senses that you are biased in some way, or that your neutrality is negatively impacted by some of the things that you're saying, they're less likely to believe you to be kind of a unbiased party, right? They're less likely to believe you. So that's an important aspect here too. Clear, direct statements. Yeah, that's an aspect of scholarly voice that bears mentioning here. Scholarly voice is direct, right? It says specifically what the author intends it to. Point of view, use of the first person in APA style is appropriate, and here's some examples of how that can come up, how that can be presented. This paper will, instead of saying this paper will discuss, you could say something like, in this paper I will discuss, right? So there we have getting rid of an anthropomorphism. The data will be collected. Instead, you could say I will collect the data. The scholar will argue. Instead, you could say I will argue. So these are appropriate uses of the first person point of view in scholarly writing, but this is something that shouldn't be overdone. You need to avoid statements of opinion, things like I think, I feel, I believe, because these aren't really effective in scholarly writing for a couple of reasons. One, it's your writing, right? Your name is on the piece, so it's already implied that what's put there is what you think or what you believe. Two, by saying I think, you're kind of introducing a little bit of doubt into your own writing. It's less strong. It's like saying, well, it really looks like it's this way, but it might not be, is kind of how that introduces doubt. Instead, you should just be direct. And here's an example of what I mean by that. Instead of saying, I think childhood obesity is a major concern, just be direct with it. Childhood obesity is a major concern. Yeah, it's implied that you think that. Put even better, you could add some evidence to that. Childhood obesity is a major concern as 17% of children in America are obese. You're, in that case, supporting your point as well as directly stating it without, kind of the intrusion of the author in there. Being specific, right? This is another attribute of of scholarly voice. Part of being specific is avoiding generalizations and speaking in generalities. So here's an example of a generality. Children do not get enough exercise. Although this is directly stated, which is good from our previous point, this is a generalization because, plainly put, some children do get enough exercise, right? So by saying this generally, you're kind of making a blanket statement that really isn't applicable, really that doesn't apply to every child, right? To make this better, you could say something like, many children do not get enough exercise. So again, this is it's better. You're leaving room for some children that do get enough exercise, but it really doesn't have the level of specificity that's needed for graduate level writing. Instead, tell the reader exactly how many children, right? Use a statistic that supports this notion. According to the CDC in 2012, in 2011, only 29% of high school students received the recommended amount of exercise, defined as at least 1 hour per day. So here we have a really specific statement. It's not only telling the reader exactly what percentage of high school students did not meet this, recommended amount of exercise, but it's telling the reader what that recommended amount of exercise is. So that portion of this statistic isn't, it's not unknown to the reader. You're telling the reader specifically how much exercise a person needs in order to get the recommended amount, how much the recommended amount is, better said, and then what percentage of people in a certain population are not getting that. So again, you're getting more specific as these examples go on, and the most specific example is going to tell the reader directly the numbers in play here. As always, another part of scholarly voice is you got to consider your audience here, right? When you're crafting a piece of poetry, or you're just kind of explaining an idea to your friends, that's a different audience than a scholarly community, right? But really, when you're writing at a graduate level, you are writing for an audience that readers that are within that scholarly field, right? So you're really writing to an audience of your peers. So that should really, kind of craft the way that you explain ideas, and the way that the tone that you use as you do so. Okay, lastly then, let's move to APA style. Here's a picture of the APA 7 publication manual. Yeah. APA style, what is it? I mean, it's a style of citing sources and formatting your writing. Some of you, if you're working in the humanities, you might be used to MLA style. I know I was in my undergraduate experience. Others might be used to something like Chicago style, just depending on what you've been, what fields you've been working within. In the social sciences, as this slide says, APA style is that preferred notation style. So that's really what you need to kind of become comfortable in working with. And in doing so, in developing that comfortability, you are really, using the language of the social sciences. And that's important because, you want to be kind of showing your work in the same way that the other scholars in the social sciences do. It's almost a credibility piece. You're showing the reader that I know how to speak in the language of the social sciences. So that makes the reader more apt again to believe what you're talking about. There was recently a transition, a new version of APA style. Walden University is now working within APA 7 rather than APA 6. And there are some pretty significant changes there. I would put a plug for the APA 7th edition by saying that a lot of the changes from 6 to 7 really make sense and go a long way towards streamlining a lot of the aspects that in APA 6 were a little bit more, it was just more difficult. There was more rules that were associated with presenting some sources and things like that. Without getting into it too much, I would just say that APA 7 makes a little more sense in some cases than APA 6. But I know this is a big transition for a lot of you, and on this slide you can find a number of resources that can help you with this transition. An updated web page, what that looks like, a comparison table, some frequently asked questions about APA 7. These can be helpful resources if this is something that you're finding yourself kind of perseverating on. Also, webinars are included in this transition, and there were webinars specifically related to the changes from APA 6 to APA 7. So, again, if this is something that you find yourself, causing you some anxiety and whatnot, I would encourage you to take a look at some of these resources to kind of smooth that transition. What does it look like? I mean, really where this, you have kind of the general formatting of your document, but, APA is really applicable when you use sources. Reference entries, here's an example of a reference entry here. And really what this is meant to show is the kind of information that you're going to be including in a reference entry. This one being for a journal article. You have the author's last name, you have the first initial there. Following that is the year of publication. After that, you have the title of the specific piece. The journal title would be the next element, and you see that's italicized. Volume, issue number, page range, and then lastly the DOI number if there is one there. This is just kind of meant to be kind of just an exposure to what this looks like. And there are a number of other resources that can be useful to you in kind of dealing with different sources and thinking about what publication information needs to be included there. Citations can look like this. We have a couple of different kinds of citations in APA style. First, we have our parenthetical citation, Fitts, 2014, within that parenthetical there. That's one option for citing. When you're using the name of the author in the text of the sentence, You should then, in that case, use a narrative citation, which is kind of our second example here, Fitts, and then in parentheses 2014, that year of publication. And again, that would be appropriate to use when you're using the name of the author in the text of the sentence. So something like Fitts 2014 argued, something like that would be an appropriate use of a narrative citation. But again, these are just kind of meant to be some examples. If you're delving deeper into this, if this is something, as I kind of get the sense, is something that you guys would like to work on more or have more resources to draw upon when you're working with APA style, here are some of those. APA style introduction page is going to go more in depth with what I just said about APA style. So that's a good place to start. It's a good jumping off point if you're unfamiliar with APA style. Walden templates is they're templates that we offer to help students in formatting their entire document in APA style. It has kind of a pre-set up formatting for students to then kind of put their writing into. These can be really helpful also. Common reference list examples. This is something that I use all the time. I think my colleagues in the Writing Center would kind of echo that this is a really good resource that offers reference examples for a number of different sources. If you're looking at journal articles or books or web pages or course materials or legal materials, it really has a wide range of kind of common sources and examples of how those would look in a reference list. So that would be maybe even a page I would recommend bookmarking. APA citations and style webinars. Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, there are webinars that we put on that deal specifically with APA style, APA citations, APA references. So those could be a helpful follow-up to this webinar if that's something that, again, you think is applicable to you or something you'd like to develop a little more familiarity with. Lastly, APA modules, which is more of kind of like a test and then check your progress type resource that we offer. If that's kind of more your learning style, if you'd rather kind of be tested on some of these things, that would be something that would be applicable to you as well. But all of this to say that Walden really offers a number of resources that can be helpful for you if this is something that you struggle with. So do take advantage of those. Absolutely. To recap then, use scholarly arguments to join a conversation. This is what graduate level writing is all about, right? Use your own voice, take your own stance, and really contribute to the conversation going on around a topic area. I know this can seem daunting, but really it's an opportunity for you to express yourself, which I find exciting, and I hope if you don't, that eventually someday you will. Keep your tone formal and neutral and your sentences simple. Yeah, this is a good idea because simple sentences are easier for readers to kind of gain the meaning from, right? Formality in your tone is important. You want to use formal language so that you're taken seriously in these formal communities. This is something that's favored in academic writing, and that neutral tone is really important for your own credibility as an author. You don't want the reader to get the sense that you're arguing on one side over the other just because of kind of some inlaid bias of your own. The stance that you take should be supported by strong evidence, and you want to give. My point is this: you want to give the author the impression that you've read enough research on both sides of an argument that the stance you're taking is the one that's most logical to you, rather than kind of cherry picking articles that support a bias point. I hope that was clear. Paraphrase mindfully and carefully. Yeah, be cognizant that you're representing the author's ideas accurately and fairly, that you're keeping it in its original context. That's an important aspect. Lastly, use APA style. This is the preferred notation style of the social sciences. Use that language of the social sciences when you're participating in conversations in the social sciences. So with that, then I'll ask you again, Claire, were there any questions that you felt could you?
I did not get any specific questions, so I'll go ahead and wrap us up here. If you do have additional questions, and would like to reach out to us, go ahead and let us know via writingsupport@waldenu.edu or visit our live chat hours. Uh, I do see a quick question about accessing the PowerPoint. You can download it from the Files pod on the bottom right of your screen there. You just click on the slides and then you'll have the download file option pop up for you. And the links are active in that PowerPoint. So you should be able to go ahead and go through it. You can also access the PowerPoint if you watch this recording. Once it's posted later, you'll be able to go to the recording and download the PowerPoint from there. All right. So again, this was writing at the graduate level. Thank you, Michael, for presenting today. If you do have questions, go ahead and send them to us via that email so that I'm sure that somebody has the time to answer you thoroughly and fully. If you'd like to learn more, the webinars, we have webinars multiple times throughout the month. You might enjoy building and organizing academic arguments and or life cycle of a paper, especially if you're just starting out in your graduate level program, as those really kind of go through some basics that Michael touched on today in more detail. You can also make a paper review appointment with Michael, myself, or many of our colleagues and have somebody look over your work and give you feedback directly on any questions or topics that you would like us to cover in your academic writing. So thank you again for coming in today and have a wonderful rest of your day.